This week on Arts InSight, celebrating 100 years of the Houston Ship Channel.
We had to create a space where we really could evoke the environment of the ship channel as much as possible.
A surfer dude turned master craftsman.
The biggest challenges I think I face making the skateboards is to continue coming up with new designs.
A new view of Western landscapes.
This show allows artists of today to not reinterpret, but to say it through their own visual vocabulary.
And a photographer finds a new way to see.
It's just liberating for me in terms of being creative.
I'm Ernie Manous, and it's time to get Arts InSight. Welcome to Arts InSight, coming to you from the Houston Ship Channel, the lifeline between the Port of Houston and the Gulf of Mexico. As the Ship Channel celebrates 100 years as a deep water port, a new exhibit at the Julia Eidson Building demonstrates the people that helped make the port and the city of Houston a success.
One of the things that attracted me to the Ship Channel and to the Port of Houston was its vastness. It really is an amazing entity, very organic, and yet involving literally hundreds of thousands of people. Stories of a Workforce is really a departure from most treatments of the port and the Houston Ship Channel, because most of them look at the history of an institution. And those are important things, but none of it would exist without the people involved in making those institutions function. So this exhibition is really about giving voice to the men and women who work along the ship channel and are the essential element in making it happen, but who are completely unheard in most histories and renderings of the port or the ship channel.
My dad and my uncle had a marine transportation company. They owned tugs and barges, and they operated out of Houston, in the Gulf, and foreign flag vessels. I started in the repair business myself in 1998. They call it getting salt water in your veins, and you somehow can't get it out. Every day is different. Ships are like little cities. They've got every kind of system in them that any city would have. And so they're incredibly complex. They have to support people, they have to move products, and they have to survive in a saltwater, corrosive environment.
The exhibition is organized around themes that were really common in the interviews. We look at families, we look at communities, we look at the importance of know-how and knowledge and how that's changed. We look at the struggles that the workforce has gone through over the last, in particular, 50 years. We had to create a space where we really could evoke the environment of the ship channel as much as possible. So literally, we built out a boat because we wanted people to have a sense of what it was like to mount a vessel and what it was like to sort of stand at the helm. We wanted to use large photographs in many instances because of the scale of the work that people do and the scale of the setting that is the Houston Ship Channel. It's 52 miles long.
Port of Houston is one of the more challenging ports in the United States with the amount of traffic we have here.
The audio-visual installations and the audio installations are essential to that whole notion of really not telling the story through our voice, but through the voices of the people themselves.
My name's Steve Bennett, and I started tying up ships in 1977. I've been doing this job now for 37 years. The boats I started back 37 years ago were wooden boats, and I like to say it was when boats were wooden and men were steel. I wore a cowboy hat and cowboy boots down on the docks. Nowadays I have to wear hard hats, life jacket, I have a radio with me, steel-toed boots on, A lot of stuff has changed.
The Biggers painting that's part of the exhibition is one of the great surprises. I knew it had been commissioned by an ILA local. The ILA is the International Longshoremen's Union. So I just started calling. And I found T.L. Simon, who is the president of ILA 24, and he said, sure enough, it's right here in our union hall. It's an incredible piece. It was commissioned in 1957 by ILA 872, which was an all African American ILA local at the time. And so it's a document, it's an homage that Biggers created, really tracing the history of black labor on the port in relationship to the longshoremen.
And to show the new workers that was coming into the industry, progression from the old days up to now, to modern times, as far as that mirror goes.
And Stories of a Workforce, the exhibition as a whole, celebrates that human contribution and gives voice to the people who have built, maintained, and continue to make the ship channel happen and be this amazing entity in our city.
Stories of a Workforce will be on view through January. The exhibit is part of a 3-month-long celebration of the ship channel and the East End called Transported and Renewed. Events also include a huge street fest and marching band parade at Navigation Street Esplanade next weekend. For more information, go to transportedrenewed.com. Up next, down the coastaway in Florida, a couple turned to skateboarding when the Gulf waves proved too calm for surfing.
My name is Nick Lambesi. I'm a craftsman, and making skateboards is my art.
Longline Skateboards is a company that my husband and I started, and it just grew out of our passion for surfing, and which evolved into our passion for skating.
Growing up in Florida, we've always been around the water. We'd go out surfing, and I'll hang out in big groups and just be out there all together, and sometimes you can't go out surfing, so we started looking into these longer skateboards, and this gives you that surf ride, so took it to the street, surfed the sidewalk. I think I made my first skateboard when I was, I think around 9 or 10 years old. It took us probably 10 years of doing it to make that perfect combination of wood where not only was it flexible and strong in the same token, but also light.
No two of our skateboards are alike. Each one kind of has its own personality, and it's just, there's something about you having a product or a thing that no one else has. You know, there's definitely a cool feeling about that.
We press the wood together ourselves. It's a rough cutout, and all the boards are done in-house by hand. So all the sanding and everything is done by hand. And then staining or painting or anything like that. And we put them together and safely store them so they don't get all dusty in our very small shop, and away they go.
Nick's definitely a craftsman, you know, and he definitely has an artistic eye. You can't not have an artistic eye and make a skateboard that gorgeous, not symmetrical, and with all the details that he does.
I never really considered it an art, but I guess building the skateboards is kind of an art. You're coming up with you know, all the schemes and the painting. To me, they look like old surfboards. You're building something out of wood. You're shaping it, you're sanding it, comes natural.
I think they're definitely pieces of art. A lot of people, some people actually buy them to just hang on the wall. Some people, they always tell us when they get the skateboards that they're almost too afraid to ride it because it's so nice. They don't want to scratch it. You know, it's kind of like your first drive in your brand new car. It's like, scratch is going to happen, but you're going to cry a little bit when it does. Every skateboard, I would have to say, is on a personal level, because every single one, there's not one square inch of the board that I haven't touched 50 times. You know what I mean? You're always trying to get every little mark right, all the lines straight. Yeah, it's definitely something I take very personal. He's so passionate about the process and everything that he does. And if it's not perfect, he's not done, you know? So it's just a great way for him to thrive in that passion. One of the biggest challenges I think I face making the skateboards is to continue coming up with new designs.
You can't make the same old thing, the same old thing. So to always have a different shape and a different design and something that doesn't look repetitious, that's my biggest challenge.
We've always been skating. You know, if there wasn't surf, then we would go skating.
Sometimes you get going real fast down steep bridges or something like that. It could be quite the adrenaline rush, like, you know, wipe any second that you make it, and then when you make it and everybody's watching and you're a star for a second, you know.
It's always just kind of been involved in our lives, and it just gives you so much freedom.
My inspiration for making the skateboards right now is just the fact that so many people are still into it. I thought it was always something that would fade, and it seems to grow more than anything.
The joy that I get to see on his face when he gives someone their skateboard and they start riding it, or he's out with his friends cruising around on boards and just watching him watch them on board he made it's just so awesome for me. It's like awe-inspiring kind of feeling.
See, the thing that makes me the happiest is you're creating out of a couple of pieces of wood this skateboard that somebody's going to take and use and go ride to see their friends, and they're going to look at it and compare who's is faster, you know, who can do more tricks, and just the same thing that it brought to me when I was younger. Making them and getting them out there and selling them to other young kids, and it's you know, the next generation coming up, to see that all come to life again, that's an awesome feeling. And that's why I keep doing it.
To learn more, visit longlineskateboards.com. And now from the Gulf Coast to the Rockies, an exhibition that celebrates the evolving culture of the West.
I know when people think of Western art, immediately it's cowboys, wagon trains, things like that. But that doesn't exist in that fashion today.
I think the show, how it might differ from the traditional Western art. You think of it as cowboys and Indians and horses and landscapes that have to do with the West. This show allows artists of today to not reinterpret, but to say it through their own visual vocabulary.
The niche of the Coors Western Art Exhibit and Sale, and my vision as a curator for this show, is to stick with what is happening today, contemporary art. So what we're doing is saying, what is the West like today? And in this show, you will see art from so many different artists who have a different take on what they see happening in the West, and then approach it in their medium. This year, our featured artist is Quang Ho.
I came from Vietnam. In 1975, I came over a day after the fall of Saigon. I was 11 years old. I started drawing when I was about 2 or 3 years old, and I never stopped. I have trouble going to sleep at night because there's not enough time in a day to do all the concepts that I have in my head. I will never have writer's block, in the sense that I can start with any one thing, a horse or a still life or a landscape, and I immediately see 10 different ways to talk about that.
He absolutely doesn't look like your typical Westerner, but he's very much of the West. He is looking at the West and horses and everything else in this countryside from a different perspective. He sees the horses as athletes. He sees them as graceful as ballerinas. But he also brings this really wonderful technique. It's very much the joy of paint. Playing with paint, pushing colors in and out, playing with abstract forms. How much can he lose of that horse and still keep us as an audience engaged?
Some of the paintings, I'll paint a very complete, realistic horse, and then I scrape it all off, and then go back on top of it. So that's why you have layers and layers on the paintings. So the horse is just the starting point. It allows me to explore with paint, and the horses can change to, I'll keep parts of it and let other parts go. So in the end, the composition is what really matters.
Our artists have a lot of fun with the show. We have oil, pastel, watercolor, bronze, and stone sculpture. We also have clay work in the show, which are generally the traditional forms that you find in a show like this. We're one of the few shows that includes photography. There's a photograph in the show that's from Mesquite, Texas, that is a tree that has several hanging dead coyotes from it. And ranchers to this day fight with environmentalists, and it's a big issue in the West. So instead of shying away from having a confrontational photograph like that in the show, we put it out there, and it's going to be a great conversation starter.
There's such a wonderful variety of work in the show, and Rose has done a really great job of bringing it to a higher level than just Western art, in a sense.
This particular art exhibit, being at the National Western Stock Show, you don't just experience it visually, you hear it and you smell it. This show, we are on the grounds of the stockyards. It's a lot of fun, it's loud, it's enjoyable, it's an experience. It's a Western experience. And all the net proceeds that we raise from this show goes to the National Western Scholarship Trust. So we are literally helping keep the Western way of life alive and well, because we are putting kids through college who are studying agribusiness, rural family health, medicine, veterinary sciences, and on and on. So we have been able to do some really wonderful things with Western art in a space like this.
I know what art does to me as an artist. It has taught me to dig deeper. It transports you into a state of aesthetic arrest, which is, in a way, stepping out of the world. And where time stops and wanting stops, there's no desire. Everything stops, and there's just beauty.
I think the best way that art in general, and in particular this show, the Coors Western Art Exhibit, can help people understand the West is when you look at the paintings and the sculpture and everything that's in the show, it's very hard to walk out of these doors and not look at the landscape differently. It's an experience, and you walk through life and you see the world differently. It's a wonderful thing art does for us.
For more information, visit CoorsWesternArt.com. Finally tonight, you can often find photographer Craig Royal perched over the railing beneath his favorite bridge, snapping photographs of rippling water. It's a place that's given the photographer a new outlook.
I have optic nerve damage, or optic atrophy, it's also called. I've had it since birth. My left eye is corrected to 2350, and my right eye is corrected to 2450, which averages out to 2400, which means I can barely see the top of the eye chart. My central vision is a white blind spot. The blurred peripheral vision has an impressionist quality about it, like impressionist painting. I don't see a lot of detail. In particular, my visual impairment abstracts are specifically about my visual impairment, my blurred vision, and the blind spot that I see. Trying to figure out what to do creatively, and I bought a Nikon D40 and started taking pictures with that. It was a really nice process to go through, and very accessible for someone who's visually impaired. I take the photos in rapid succession. I use, the camera will shoot 6 frames per second, so I'm just continually firing as the water ripples in front of me. I'm using a 7300 millimeter lens, so it's a telephoto lens, and it picks up the detail of the reflection, something you really wouldn't see from where you're standing. And I use a slow shutter speed, which at about 1/8 of a second or less. And that allows the reflection to expand and slow down a bit as it moves across the water. And it creates some really fantastic shapes. Back in 2008, I was under the bridge photographing the reflections of the understructure of the bridge. The pylons and the lintels and that whole form reflected into the water, and was interested in that and how the ripples would affect that. And at one shot, it showed this band of white light which comes from this narrow gap in the center of the bridge. And I looked at it, and then I saw this other band of light. It was yellow light, and that was a band of direct sunlight hitting the water, so that you have the reflection of the direct sunlight and the reflection of the sky. So there are two different bands there. And so I was real curious about that once I noticed it in the photograph on screen. Started photographing those bands of light and how they were activated by the rippling water and the abstract forms the light would take due to that rippling. It brought the reflections into the third dimension, and it just created some fascinating forms and shapes that really captivated my imagination. Reflection suggests something, say a face, and I feel like it's not quite complete, or, you know, I'll alter it to make it more obvious, the face. And I've done that in particular with a series called Persistence of Memory. See, this gap here creates this reflection, and that's where it all happens. I've described the setting as the water being a canvas, the reflections being pigment, and the wind is the brush, and that these three elements come together and are able to create abstract art or an image that's more suggestive, say like a face. The technical term for that is pareidolia, where the human mind tries to make sense of abstract stimulus. Like people will see animals and clouds and things like that. Well, I find that in these reflections, and that will create a story around it for me. It just resonates. I was surprised to find this piece of wood floating inside a reflection when I got the image uploaded to the computer. And the reflections interact it like they'll touch it like delicately, and they'll move back and they'll touch it in different areas. It's really an interesting interaction between light and form. I enjoy the immediacy of photography so much, and the ability to use a camera as a paintbrush to create abstract art. It's just liberating for me in terms of being creative. It's just been wonderful.
To see more, visit craigroyal.zenfolio.com. From the Houston Ship Channel, that's a wrap for this edition of Arts Insight. Remember, to enjoy all the great and mostly free events celebrating the port and the East End, just visit transportedrenewed.com. And be back here next week to meet textile artist Kate DePara. For all of us here at Houston Public Media, I'm Ernie Manous. Thanks for watching, and have a great week.